forgot we filmed this part now. So how you doing, David Brickley? Business of Social podcast, episode number 34. A lot of amazing 34s. We got Shaq and Barkley, who are both on Inside the NBA TNT. Nolan Ryan, Herschel Walker. Who are we going with? I feel like Shaq is kind of an easy one to go with. Let's go with Barkley. Charles Barkley podcast. All right. So the Business Social, of course, we want to keep your thumb on the pulse of the ever-changing digital and marketing landscape. And I'm really excited to dig into the global CEO of Advertising Week. That's Matt Scheckner. He spent a lot of time, 16 years now, putting on one of the top conferences in the world there in New York, London, Tokyo, Mexico City. They just added an Africa show as well, which we're really excited about. But he's really seen this entire transition, right, from when he started the conference and talks to a lot of impressive people. He golfed with Barack Obama. I'm going to ask him about that a little bit. But overall, I think you'll really enjoy his perspective for episode number 34. Ladies and gentlemen, Matt Scheckner. All right, guys, he is the global CEO of Advertising Week. Matt Scheckner joins us on the show. Matt, how are we doing?
Doing terrific. Good to be with you this afternoon on this rainy, dark afternoon.
Right on, man. So I always kick things off with a random question. If my research is correct, you've actually played golf with Barack Obama. Is that correct?
I have.
Okay.
I was in a wonderful place in London called the Grove, and got to play with President Obama and Prime Minister David Cameron.
So I wanted to ask you, I think Barack Obama in a golf foursome is really a popular choice in people's dream foursome when you ask him that question. Who would you want in your dream foursome? It seems like you may have had a couple already, but who makes the list?
That's a great question. I'm left-handed as a golfer.
Okay.
I don't love his politics, but I love watching Phil Mickelson.
Yeah,
and
he's great.
How brave he is and that he tries things that may not always work out, but he's willing to try.
Okay.
So from that world, I would say, from the golf world proper, I would say him. I've gotten to play at some pretty cool places. And I really enjoyed, there was a club in LA called Lakeside that's still there, that's near Universal. Mm-hmm. And back in the day, it's where all the old Hollywood stars, a lot of them would play. Dean Martin still has a parking space there.
Nice.
So if he was alive, I would love for Dean Martin to be in that group, because I think that would be a tremendous amount of fun. And I've always been a great admirer of Annika Sorenstam, who was really the breakthrough women player. And she was also very involved in the New York City Marathon here. A lot of my early career was in sport. So I would say two golfers, Mickelson, Sorenstam, and the one you wouldn't expect would be Dean Martin.
I like it, man. Very cool. So I want to get into your story a little bit, because you've been doing Advertising Week now for all 15 years, 16 years?
Yeah, just about,
Yeah, it's awesome. But I'd love to get just a quick background on your background, right? Like where you started, what led you to think of this conference and all that you kind of do in the advertising world.
Well, the irony, having run Advertising Week globally since we started in New York in 2004, we expanded to London 2013, Tokyo 2016, Sydney and Mexico City 2018.
And you're launching in Africa, right? Coming up?
You got it.
Wow.
So that's later this year. But the irony is, before I started working on this as far back as October of 2002, is I had never worked in advertising. Most of my background was in sport. At the age of 23, so just over 30 years ago, I was appointed as the first ever executive director of the New York City Sports Commission. And that was sort of a chamber of commerce for sports for New York, to bid on new events, collegiate, amateur, or Olympic, and professional, and to sort of keep what we had. And if you go back and you look at the history of New York sports, in professional sports alone, all the teams that play in New Jersey used to play in New York.
Yeah.
And I'm a giant season ticket holder. I go to the games in the Meadowlands. Yeah. So you say, what difference does it make? It's, my office now, we're 7 miles from the Meadowlands. We're right by Madison Square Garden. So what difference does it make? Well, all that tax money goes to Trenton instead of Albany.
That's true.
So that makes a lot of difference. And all of that stuff happened because New York City was asleep. So part of what we did back then was to wake us up to the economic development, part and opportunity that sports presents, and that was a great part of my career.
So advertising, what you guys call it, the premier event for marketing, brand, advertising, technology professionals. You mentioned all the major cities that you have broken down. So what led you to that? You're working in sport, you're working in New York, and
so I was a serial entrepreneur.
Okay.
In 1994, when Giuliani came in, he liked what we had built. We were a not-for-profit, so we had the imprimatur of City Hall, but we're not under the control of the government, and all the money was private. I raised all the money.
Okay.
So Giuliani comes in and says, "Wait a minute, we don't control this thing?" And I said, "No, it doesn't belong to you." And he decided he wanted our thing to become a patronage thing, and effectively give my job to, the son of a donor.
Interesting.
And they ruined the sports commission. So I am not a fan of Mayor Giuliani, and effectively put us out of business. So after that, I opened my own company that was called Empire Sports and Entertainment. The sad irony is the successor to our organization accomplished nothing, and the thing never came back, which is very sad.
Right.
So happily for me, I went out and built a business, and sort of they're like almost like a dog that you would adopt when you don't really know what breed it is. That's sort of my career. So a little bit of special events, a little bit of PR, a little bit of marketing, a little bit of sponsorship. And I did a lot of work in particular for Radio City Productions under the old owners of Radio City. Now it's part of the Madison Square Garden empire, but in its earlier iteration, Radio City Productions did a lot of big special events as a for-hire production company. So I was one of the lead producers on the opening of Arthur Ashe Stadium in 1997.
Okay.
We did a huge gig for Pepsi in 1999 for their centennial in Hawaii. In one show, we had Riverdance, Ray Charles, and the Rolling Stones. So a lot of big, sexy live production and all kinds of different projects, and built a little consulting business. In the summer of '02, I get a phone call from a friend of mine who was at DDB, said, my boss is the chair of the 4As. I didn't know what the 4As was. I know 2As is if you drink too much, is if you have a flat tire, on the Brooklyn Queens Expressway. And she explained to me the 4As, the American Association of Advertising Agencies. And back then in '02, our industry and the world were completely different, right? Facebook was on the Harvard campus.
Yep.
The iPhone was 2006. YouTube was 2007. On and on and on. All the issues that we're talking about today, AI, blockchain, data, AR, VR, none of those issues existed. At the same time, issues that are timeless, like talent, like morale, like diversity and inclusion, those you would call timeless. So they were looking for an idea to sort of galvanize the industry, which had chronically low morale, had sort of lost its perceived cool as a perception-wise, as a career for young people of all color. They recognized there was a real diversity challenge in the industry and said, could you think of something? So that's really how it started. And through my work at Radio City, the then president really liked me, and he wanted me to have an office in Radio City. His name was Arlen Kantarian. And I said, Arlen, I don't need an office. I have an office. He said, no, Scheckner, I want you near me. So he offered me something I couldn't refuse, which was an office with my own bathroom. No one could refuse that. So I had an office there, and I knew the building really well because after 6 o'clock, the executive entrance closed, and the only way in or out was through the stage door. So that sort of forced you to explore the building. And there's this wonderful little space in there called the Roxy Suite. The original impresario who created Radio City Music Hall, the famous Rockettes, and the Christmas show, which is still going on today, was a producer named Roxy Rockefeller. And he used to live in Radio City. And in that apartment, it's now the Roxy Suite, now Cablevision, or now Jim Dolan's company, The Garden, used to be Cablevision. They own it. And they use it for very, high-end special events. Frank Sinatra, when he was alive, would entertain there. So I asked a friend, and I said, can I borrow the Roxy Suite for a couple hours? Just on instinct that the where part of Advertising Week would be important.
Mm-hmm.
And so the very first meeting about Advertising Week was October of '02 with the then chair of the 4As, the late Ken Case, and this gal, Abby Hirschhorn, who worked for him. And that was the very first meeting. And, 7-8 months later, they said, all right, we're going to go forward with this. Do you want to do it? And I said, sure I do.
All right, so I actually read up on you, and you really talked about technology. And of course, when you started the conference back in '04, how that's changed the advertising world. But what are the main things you're looking at right now that are really changing the landscape of advertising?
Well, listen, I think, the pace of change is much faster than Moore's Law, way back when, which was sort of a guidepost for how quickly, technologically driven change occurred. The speed now, I think, was unimaginable, a few years ago, and how that has changed fundamentally how, whether you're on the creative side about how campaigns are created or the media side, certainly most importantly, the fuel for all this, the jet fuel, which is the brands. So I think whether you're an old school business that's been around a long time in the so-called traditional media, newspaper, magazine, radio, outdoor, all of those have been challenged to stay relevant, to reinvent themselves. Yep. In some cases, businesses that were great businesses are either gone or no longer great businesses. At the same time, others have emerged. I don't think it's true that, all the big it's been very popular to say the big holding companies, the IPGs, the Omnicoms, Publicis, WPP, et cetera, all in trouble. Well, there's a lot of great work coming out of these holding companies, whether you're on the creative side or the media side. The common thread navigating all this change, frankly, is the human capital, and that comes down to leadership. So you've got, companies like McCann, that went out and put a great, leadership team together over in this part of the world, led by Chris McDonald, and on the comm side, my longtime friend Jeremy Miller. You look at the work they're doing; it's phenomenal. Mm-hmm. They have to navigate without their leader going forward, but RGA, also part of the IPG family, coincidentally, phenomenal. You've still got great work coming out of, Publicis, Nick Law now leading on the creative side. So, you've got a lot of great work coming out of these big shops also, but the landscape is different. We were talking earlier, when, back in the day when we were growing up, you turned on your 13-inch, black and white television.
With the banana ear or the bunny ears.
Yeah. Exactly. You had 6 or 7 channels and that was it. And, the audience fragmentation now, the amount of choice, the good news is for consumers, it's never been a better time, right? Yeah. Between the productions from the traditional networks, the cable networks, Amazon, Hulu, Netflix, Disney's launching their streaming service. And the things that we can do and watch now. I mean, I travel quite a bit for Advertising Week, and, I like baseball, that I can watch the Yanks, in Japan, on my iPad in real time, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Right. So all of these things have dramatic implications for brands and the fundamental way that consumers connect with brands, how we receive information, in the most fundamental way has changed. Right. So when I was a kid growing up in Bayside, Queens, I'd wait for my dad to bring home the newspaper so I could find out who won the games the night before.
Yep.
Right now on my phone, I can literally follow not just the game, not just the inning, but I can follow every pitch, in real time.
Well, here on the West Coast too, when I was growing up, they had delays. So Laker games started at 4 on the East Coast. We couldn't start watching until 5. And once the cell phone came out, that's all that's recent history.
Yeah. And by the way, in my mind, that stuff's not that long ago.
I know it isn't.
So the pace of change, I think, is what nobody really saw coming. Credit to, the Ken Case, the chairman and the guy who first, who I first sat down with to talk about Advertising Week. I think there were some pretty smart folks then who was smart enough to know that a lot was coming, but didn't know what. And the genesis of Advertising Week was really created as a platform to have those conversations and to help the industry navigate its way forward. Whether you're a 22-year-old brand manager or account planner or buyer, or the CMO of a MasterCard or Citibank or Chase or Procter and Gamble or Unilever. So I think that's been our currency is thought leadership.
Yeah, I think one thing and my listeners will know, we bring up a ton on this show, is linear, right? I think it's a $85 billion industry, something along those lines, in terms of advertisement and where that's all going. Because as cable ratings go down and these OTTs are started, do you feel like the Fortune 500 brands will start to look at, like you said, the ESPN Plus, the Hulu, the Netflixes, and start to move their money that way? And can it be a seamless transition from these folks that made 96% of their money on linear television ads?
Well, I don't think any of them are going down without a fight.
Yeah.
And I think you look at NBC, for example, and now their global partnership with Sky. So I think the passion to invent, reinvent, to leverage the technology and make that part of the platform offering is very real. And I think that's true for all of the, long established networks. And if you look at the value of even assets like the regional sports networks, that were just sold off to, I think Sinclair ended up as the winner. That was a pretty hefty chunk of change. Mm-hmm. So I don't think, every time there's a new medium, there's always an inevitable prediction about the death of the old medium as a new one emerges. I don't see that as the case at all. I think the pressure to reinvent and to maintain profit margin is tough. And when you look at, some of the digital company profit margins, 20, 30, 40% growth per quarter, I think for other industries, that's tough.
Yes.
Right? If you're in the dry cleaning business, you're not going to be making 40% increase
and
in
especially
margin
trying to be judged on a quarterly basis. If you are, obviously on the stock
market,
you're saying
it's almost
impossible.
It's a false promise. Nobody, not very many companies or industry sectors can maintain, our country as a country. If we're at 3-4% growth, we're doing great.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's almost a false premise on, what's a good percentage of growth. But I don't think any of these players are going away. I think, some of them will not be as potent, as powerful as they were.
Do you think I think 6 conglomerates now own every television station in the country. Time Warner purchasing AT&T, of course, Disney purchasing a lot of Fox assets. Was that the right move? Do you think that makes them stronger and you partner the data with the original content and that's a venture for success as we move forward?
Well, I think you look at the content strategies of AT&T and Verizon, they're very different strategies. AT&T has become a huge owner of intellectual property and of production. And I think, they're feeding that into their system, the mobile ecosystem, via DirecTV, into people's living rooms. Right. So there's a real strategy there. I think with Disney, a lot of what they're doing in the acquisition of Fox is they want to go out and they want to create a competitor to Netflix, and pulling all their content off Netflix and coming onto their platform, which launches, I think about next year. Yeah. That's a very big initiative for that company. So I think you see a lot of people sort of covering their bases on the way we've always watched television and the way that it seems like the next generation will be watching. I mean, my kids are 24 and 21. Neither of them cares if they have a cable box in their room. So, to me, that's unfathomable. But at 54, demographically, I'm effectively dead to brand. Still alive, but dead to brand. Alive. So I hope so. So I think, I think folks are sort of trying to make sure that they can, be effective now, but prepare for the future.
What do you think every brand manager that is out there should be asking themselves right now as we sit here in 2019?
Well, I think the fundamentals of how digital media is bought, sold, and counted, those are some very big issues. And I have a lot of respect for the businesses and the growth that the two dominant players in that sector, Google and Facebook, have done. And, look at what Facebook has built over a relatively short period of time, between their core platforms on Facebook and Instagram and, now the messaging platform as well, slowly but surely. Yeah, it's very impressive. And I think, the whole transparency issue, if you talk to Bob Liadis, the president of the ANA, they've got a lot of emphasis right now between agency and brand, between platform and brand. There's a lot of heat around the whole trust transparency issue. So I think the platforms are all doing everything they can to continue to maintain and grow share. And I think with their own, different pathway, are trying to be very aggressive on the trust transparency issue. The ownership of data and third-party data. I mean, these are big, titanic issues, facing the industry. And I think successful navigation of that are very big priorities for the Silicon Valley companies, and very big priorities for brands and agencies.
What is the fine line in your opinion? Because I'd like to get your thoughts on this. As a Yankee fan, you would love to see something come across your Facebook that says, hey, buy one ticket, get three free type deal, because you're a Yankee fan and you appreciate that type of response. But with Cambridge Analytica and data, it can be used for a lot of great things. It can be used for bad things. Do you have an opinion on what that?
Well, listen, I don't think that, in fairness, that when a set of tools is built, manufactured, and put on the shelf, I don't know that anybody imagined that those tools could be used as effectively by so-called bad actors as they can for, a mom sitting in Port Washington, where I live. So I think that the how, the platforms have been used, either through influence, like what happened with our election, like what happened and influenced the election in the UK for Brexit, that we would be delivering inadvertently, because I don't believe it was purposeful, but that we would be delivering, Christmas comes early to a guy like Vladimir Putin, whose currency and very public remarks, none of this is out of school, is to sow and create unrest in the West, and to create division within our country, and to create division with the United States and our traditional allies, NATO in particular. So I think, the deployment of social media tools and platforms to that end is a very real problem. Certainly the failure of our government leadership and the White House to recognize that and to be taking action to protect our elections is, these are big, big problems. So I think that nobody in Silicon Valley saw that coming. And I think they are all trying as hard as they can to figure out how to tackle that problem. But, once the tools are on the shelf and anybody can buy them, or in this case, download them.
That's a great point.
You opened up a big, you got a big enchilada on your hands.
And that's the thing you mentioned earlier when you had CBS, NBC, Fox, and that was it. In order to be on those platforms, you had to have a huge company and pay a lot of money, and that was kind of your ability to establish yourself. But I've used this analogy before, republicannews.com. I don't know if that's a actual site or not, but if you buy that domain, you have the same way to bid as CNN, BBC, etc. And it's really hard for the end consumer to tell who's reputable, who's fake, who's not. And that's a huge concern.
I mean, listen, every day there's another story about somebody getting a deal across the finish line who shouldn't have. And there was something I just saw, coming back from lunch today on, another extremist group that was somehow able to buy something on one of them. I forgot which platform it was. So I think it's this is a very real issue. I know in a very real way that the leadership of those companies are taking it as seriously as anybody could, hope for and expect. But it's just, a tough situation, and it's a very serious situation.
Or I know you probably had a lot of coffees and drinks, and obviously you've watched a lot of people on stage at all your different events. Has there been something recently, the last year or so, that was an epiphany for you, or a great one-liner that you think really struck home, that made a lot of sense?
Well, uh, uh, listen, I gravitate towards the things that we've been able to do on stage, and I'm going to take us in a different direction, that relate to real issues. So that advertising week has been, not to say that we've been talking about aren't real issues, but I mean issues that affect broader society beyond the ecosystem of, advertising, marketing, and media. So when we had Emma Stone on stage in the fall in New York, talking about mental health, that was very meaningful. When we had Nikki Sixx from Motley Crue, who technically was dead 17 or 18 years ago from prescription meds, on stage with the Surgeon General of the United States, talking about the opioid crisis. That to me was very meaningful. What we're doing, bringing Advertising Week to Africa and creating sort of a two-way street to tell stories of innovation that are going on at that continent to the rest of the world, and bringing leaders and a lot of African American leaders to Africa for the first time to talk to and inspire young people. That's very meaningful. But in terms of, a line or, geez, we had Nile Rodgers a couple times, and to hear a guy like that talk about what it was like to work with David Bowie, what it was like to work with, the whole Daft Punk story. One that comes to mind, now you got me thinking about it. We had Danielle Lamar years ago, who's the CEO of Cirque du Soleil, and he told the story of how the Beatles and Cirque, the surviving Beatles, created the Love Show in Vegas, and how in the end it came down to a meeting with Guy Liberté, the founder, Danielle, the guy I just mentioned, with Yoko Ono, Olivia and Danny Harrison, Paul McCartney, and Ringo Starr. So to hear that story, at Advertising Week, that was really memorable.
I know we got to get you out of here, but a couple just quick hitters, or the lightning round, if you will, rapid fire. What is the common mistake you see brands making?
I think, the brand are in control of their brand. And I think there's been a little bit too much, once you're out there with a campaign, we've seen a lot of folks make mistakes who shouldn't be making mistakes.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think, the currency now that's attached to influencers, and we're looking at what's happening now, this, terrible case from USC and Lori Loughlin and Felicity Huffman, and I saw she pled guilty today. The amount of power that these influencers have, these very young kids often, and they become stewards for brands. And you're creating, on one hand, you're playing to passion, and a lot of that stuff is working. On the other hand, you've introduced an element of risk into what you're doing that's pretty high. So I think it'll be very interesting to see how that system plays out. The whole success of the Fyre Festival on the front end was all because they made, I don't know if you saw the documentary.
Oh, I did. That's one of my favorites.
They paid all these models, all this money to go out, and they made a very fancy video and created the illusion of something that wasn't real.
Yeah.
So I think the danger for brands is you've got to sit on a foundation of stuff that's real while balancing that need to be cutting edge, to be innovative, to use the modern day digital tools, to connect. But you've got to protect your brand. And you've got to, balance risk and reward.
Do you have a recent, or maybe your favorite all-time campaign, marketing, advertising campaign that just resonates with you and they thought they just knocked it out of the park?
I think the old American Express, the Do You Know Me campaign was really terrific. And I remember that one. I think they've sort of, in their current campaign, they sort of drawn back upon that a little bit. Within the same category, I think MasterCard's done very, very well with the Priceless campaign. And I think that's a favorite. I like some of the old stuff. I still like, the old Coca-Cola. I'd like to teach the world to sing. I'm obviously dating myself. I think the newer Chase stuff with Serena, was very, very well done creatively. And I like some of the stuff that's not necessarily campaigns, but I like how, certain brands manage the relationship with their own customers. I think Virgin Atlantic does a really good job. I think Soul Cycle does a really good job.
What were your thoughts on the Nike
cult of brand, cult of personality?
What were your thoughts on the Nike Colin Kaepernick ad? Because going into it, Nike knew they were going to get some people that loved it and people that really had problems with it.
Yeah, I think it for the bottom line, it was really successful for Nike. And I think
talk about your brand that you're doing the right thing.
Well, I don't know that I believe any publicity is good publicity completely. I don't think that's completely true. I think there are elements of truth in that. But I think largely because of going back to our earlier conversation about bad actors using social media, we are in a new era of polarization. And I think it's very difficult at end of day for everybody to stay neutral. We had a dinner last year at Advertising Week, and our guest speaker was clearly, very far on the left. And there were a lot of people that were on the right, in the middle, and to the right of the middle in the room. And there were a lot of people that were offended. From our vantage point, we did a big seminar last year about the image of brand America. And I was sure to have both CNN and Fox News
of course,
on stage together.
Smart.
So I think, our job is to be Switzerland and represent all perspectives. But I think brands that choose sides in a very real, resonant way, you're going to piss off somebody. And I think that's a relatively new phenomenon.
All right, so we've been talking a lot about, I'll leave you with this one, 5G. I really think it's going to change the game the same way 4G really did for these social networks and the mobile device when it comes to programmatic advertising. What are you seeing in the future that you're really paying attention to?
I think there are a lot of very big bets being made, and that will only accelerate growth further. And what we're seeing now, 5G will take what was an 8 or a 12-cylinder engine and make it an 18 or a 24-cylinder engine. Absolutely. So I think that's coming too.
And I always ask this question: if you could recommend anybody in your network that you think would provide value or be a really good guest to kind of dive into things like we just did, anybody come to mind that you would recommend for the next show?
I like a guy named Jason Harris who runs Mechanism. I think they're a mid-sized boutique-y sort of agency, but they've got scale. I love what he's doing. There's an agency, Gravity Road, that's London-based, that's now opened in America. The founders there, Mark Boyd and Mark Eves, I think very highly of. I think they've got their finger on the pulse. I really like, there's a woman named Betsy Lack, who's the head of global brand and image at Snap. I think Betsy, really has her finger on the pulse. I think those are a couple good ones.
I'll have to hit you up on those. Yeah. I appreciate that. Well, Matt, thank you much for breaking that down. Once again, he is the global CEO of Advertising Week, and it's all over the world now. Congratulations on all the success, and thanks so much for the time, man.
We'll keep throwing punches. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Matt. There he is, Matt Scheckner, the global CEO of Advertising Week. Really enjoyed that conversation and his perspective. I love how he said, I'm 54, so I'm pretty much dead to brands. That's a little harsh. Still got a lot of time to go, but it is true in a sense, at least, of what brands, going after that 18 to 34 demo or 39 demo. I thought it was interesting too. We talked ad nauseum about Fyre Festival on this show, probably the last 10 or 15 episodes. But all brands have to focus on, what's real, and it's all good to paint an amazing picture, but if that picture is something that you can't end up selling or get in the consumer's hands, it can lead to a lot of issues, and also the power of influencers, which is kind of similar to, I think, these brands that have been dealing with athletes or different people that sponsor their brand, it gets into a situation where now these influencers are the face of your brand. You have to be super careful about that, and really never heard anybody break it down like that. And I think it's super important. And the biggest thing I liked his take on was data. I mean, where is that fine line when you look at Cambridge Analytica and what happened with the election? Those are some scary, bad things. At the same time, it's really exciting right now for marketers and advertisers because you can actually reach the person. And as a consumer, you can actually feed me stuff that I want to see rather than just, spray and pray approach. So, we're still dealing with that. I think it's so new. The Facebooks of the world didn't understand how big of a loophole that was to close, and they're working towards that. So we'll see, but that's going to be a huge debate and something we'll have to fix as advertisers and as platforms as we continue and as technology continues to get faster and more powerful. So I really thought that was a really great episode with Matt Scheckner, once again, the global CEO of Adweek. As always, I want to thank David Furker, Will Kelly, Dylan, first show. All right. Coming in 34 episodes in. Appreciate all the help. This has been the Business of Social, powered by STN Digital. Make sure if you like the program, hit us up on iTunes, give us that 5-star review. We will really appreciate it. And that's it. I'm David Brickley, Business of Social podcast, powered by STN Digital.